The Sand People of Tatooine, often referred to as Tusken Raiders, have long been characterized as brutal, heartless savages in Star Wars media. The films in particular depict them as vicious aggressors that wage a senseless war against the human settlers of Tatooine, described as animals by a few major characters. But those of you who have been watching the Book of Boba Fett probably know by now that this wasn't the full story. Taking after The Mandalorian and Knights of the Old Republic, the Book of Boba Fett has shown a much more reasonable and even honorable side of the Sand People. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at Sand People culture and what these enigmatic warriors were actually like.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Sand People have long been go-to antagonists for Star Wars stories set on Tatooine, and over the years we've seen some tales of them doing some pretty despicable things. In both A New Hope and The Phantom Menace, they attacked Luke and Anakin Skywalker for seemingly no reason, striking from the shadows with Gaddafi sticks and cycler rifles. In Attack of the Clones, they took it a step further and kidnapped Shmi Skywalker, torturing her to death as part of a ritual that we'll discuss in more detail later. But the Book of Boba Fett has shown casual fans a different side of the Sand People. In the show, they capture Boba Fett and take him as a slave, but over time, Boba earns their respect. They allow Boba to train as a warrior to prove his worth, and they even welcome him into their tribe. Not only was Fett able to reason with the Sand People, but he also came to sympathize with them and understand their distrust of outsiders. The more Fett came to understand them, the more he realized they weren't so bad after all. The Book of Boba Fett did not retcon the Sand People in any way. They always had this more sympathetic side to them. The reason they usually seem so brutal and evil is because the audience's perspective is often skewed in stories that feature them. Our view is colored by the attitudes of Tatooine settlers, who absolutely despised the ones they called Tusken Raiders. Let's talk about that name for a moment. A lot of fans assume that Sand People is a sort of slur and Tusken Raider is the proper name for Tatooine's indigenous warriors. But it's actually the other way around. Tusken is not an indigenous name, rather it was the name of a remote fortress built by Tatooine settlers specifically to protect against them, which the Sand People raised. They got called Tusken Raiders because they attacked Fort Tusken, a legitimate military target, over a land dispute. As with many perceptions fans have of the Sand People, the name Tusken Raiders is mostly used because we don't often see the full story when it comes to the Sand People. The Book of Boba Fett gave us a much more honest view of the Sand People, one that actually echoes material we've seen in Legends. It's a welcome change of pace, in our opinion. We've established that the common view of the Sand People is deeply flawed, but what, then, were they actually like? To answer that question, we need to dive deep into their culture. The expanded universe actually gives a lot of information about Sand People culture. Not all of it is canon, but canon hasn't conflicted with any Legends lore about the Sand People so far. Central to Sand People culture was their creation myth, a tale of an ancient age that was passed down orally from generation to generation. The story spoke of a time when Tatooine was green with life, when most of the world was covered by vast oceans and its people dared to think themselves better than the land. On ancient Tatooine, their ancestors built great cities, developed fearsome technologies, and even took ships into space, seeking to touch the stars. But their ancient ancestors were conquered by the Builders, a vicious alien race with an empire that spanned the stars. As translated by HK47, the legends claim that the Builders did not touch the stars. Instead, they lashed them to milestones. The Builders enslaved the ancient inhabitants of Tatooine and abducted many of them to serve on other worlds. But one day, the Builders were hit by a terrible plague, and Tatooine took the opportunity to rebel. The ancestors of the Sand People destroyed the Builders' machines and drove them from Tatooine, then sought shelter deep in the caves as the Builders exacted their revenge. The Builders glassed the entire surface of Tatooine, boiling away at its oceans and cleansing it of all but a few species. Over millennia, the glass ground down into sand and the people of Tatooine emerged from their caves, finding the planet a great desert. As the Sand People saw it, their ancient ancestors had sinned. They had disrespected the land and set themselves apart from it, ravaging the countryside to build great towers and starships. As punishment, they had been conquered and their homes were destroyed. But upon emerging from the caves after the bombardment, Tatooine's natives saw the error of their ways. Though their homeworld had been reduced to sand, they vowed to cherish what was left. Ever after, they saw themselves as part of the land and aimed to live in harmony with it. Thus, they became the Sand People. This, by the way, was why the Sand People hated Offworlders. Their lack of advanced technology wasn't due to lack of will or skill, rather it was a deliberate choice. They lived simply because they considered it blasphemous to rely on machines to do the hard work in life for them. Most tribes made exceptions out of necessity. Some tribes of Sand People accepted the use of outsider weapons or moisture evaporators, while the Sand People we saw in the Book of Boba Fett made use of speeder bikes, which was a rarity. Most Sand People tribes believed that it was unacceptable to use speeder bikes or other vehicles as it severed a connection with the land. They restricted themselves to travel on foot or on sacred animals like banthas to maintain a direct connection with the soil. Few of Tatooine's settlers had similar values. Instead, they reminded the Sand People of the builders and the arrogance of their ancestors. The Sand People lived hard lives in the most unforgiving parts of Tatooine's Dune Sea, and their way of life was mostly built around survival. Their wrappings were originally developed as a protective measure against the suns, but they quickly took on far greater significance in Sand People culture. The wrappings of Sand People were considered sacred, and there were many rituals concerning how they should be made and ornamented. Sand People almost never removed their wrappings, not even in sleep or death. It was only permissible for a Sand person to remove their wrappings during coming of age rituals, on their wedding nights, during childbirth, and when they were alone in their tents with their spouses. Some Sand People detested outsiders for their lack of wrappings and were more inclined to respect those who were usually fully covered, such as Mandalorians, though many tribes were tolerant of unwrapped outsiders. Though the Sand People were warriors, they did not worship strength and they didn't glorify violence or battle. Rather, the Sand People respected struggle. They saw themselves as a people shaped by extraordinary hardship and overcame the great challenges of living on Tatooine with every waking moment. They respected many ways of overcoming challenges, including non-violent ones, so long as they didn't make tasks overly easy. However, they did have a great many violent rituals and customs. Their males were expected to hunt and return with trophies from Tatooine's great beasts, with the most prized trophy of all being a pearl from the gullet of a crate dragon. In another ritual, the Blood Rite, adolescent Sand People were expected to capture vicious beasts and slowly torture them to death. This was usually done with animals, but some Sand People tribes instead opted to capture and torture human settlers who they considered the cruelest beasts of them all. As with many warrior cultures, the Sand People were honor-driven. They never broke their vows or promises and consequently never gave up their feuds. Tatooine settlers learned that the hard way, especially those who made the mistake of crossing the Sand People or those affiliated with settlers who did. There were many reasons for the Sand People's hatred of Tatooine's settlers. We've already mentioned how they believed outsiders were blasphemous by setting themselves apart from the land and relying too much on technology, as well as how they distrusted those who didn't wear wrappings. But the biggest reason the Sand People hated settlers is, well, because they were settlers. The outsiders came to Tatooine without permission, trespassed on the Sand People's lands, and declared themselves the planet's rulers. That alone is a pretty valid reason for war, never mind border skirmishes. To make matters worse, the earliest settlers on Tatooine were miners. They set out across the desert in sand crawlers, tearing up the sand with iron shovels and other great machines. Not only did these outsiders invade the ancestral homelands of the Sand People, but they also desecrated those lands. They showed the utmost disrespect for the Sand People held in such importance. This was the reason for many early wars between the Sand People and the settlers. Later groups of settlers made matters worse by actively provoking the Sand People. 600 years before the films, the bandit Alcara allied with a tribe of Sand People only to betray them and slaughter the whole tribe in cold blood. This was the start of the blood feud between the Sand People and more modern groups of settlers, including the ones seen in the films. Of course, the Sand People weren't a monolith, but a collection of various tribes. The different tribes of the Dune Sea all had their own versions of the common culture, and not all of them had a policy of killing outsiders on sight. Some, like the tribe we saw in the Book of Boba Fett, were more tolerant, but even the ones that weren't deserved sympathy. As brutal as the Sand People could be, they weren't evil, nor were they the aggressors. They were merely defending their sacred lands from invaders and despoilers. We hope to see more sympathetic depictions of the Sand People in future Star Wars media. It's more interesting and more honest than what we see in the films. But what do you think? Did you know all this about the Sand People? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.